Chapter 1, The Dying Flower. Hope is a poison, and I've been drinking it for centuries. I stood at the edge of my balcony, the mountain air biting at my skin like a pack of starving wolves. Below me, the kingdom was rotting. My people were fighting over scraps of land while the magic in our blood turned to ash. Truth be told, I was done. I looked down at the reports on my desk. More lawlessness, more blood, more alphas acting like kings in their own dirt patches. What followed was a hollow silence that usually filled this room. I am the Alpha King, but a king without a miracle is just a man with a heavy crown. My eyes drifted to the center of my desk. There it sat, a dead white flower. It was a moon lily, once the symbol of the white wolf prophecy, now just a shriveled, brown corpse. Maybe it was fate mocking me, or maybe it was just a reminder that the gods had left us a long time ago. "Sire, the transport for the Grey Ridge inspection is ready," my captain, Elias, murmured from the door. I didn't turn around because I couldn't stand the look of pity I knew was on his face. "Grey Ridge," I spat, the name tasting like copper. "Alpha Gavin is a vulture. He's been picking at the bones of the smaller packs for months. Why should I care if he buys another slave?" Elias stepped closer, his boots clicking on the stone. "Because the law still matters, Dominic. Even if the magic doesn't." I let out a breath that felt like lead. Still, I grabbed my coat. I had to go. Not because I believed in justice anymore, but because the boredom was a slow-acting venom. I needed a reason to snap someone's neck. Deep down, I knew the truth. I was looking for a ghost that didn't want to be found. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and decay, I looked at the flower one last time. It was brittle. It was dead. Just like the hope of my bloodline. I walked past it, my boots crushing a fallen petal into dust. Chapter 2, The Shadow in the Basement. The Mercer estate smelled of expensive perfume and cheap lies. I stood in their foyer, watching the three sisters, the Mercer, royalty, preen like peacocks. They were beautiful in a way that felt sharp and dangerous, like a glass blade. They wanted my attention, my favor, and probably my bed. But then, I saw the way they looked at the floor whenever I mentioned the word servants. "Your Majesty, we are honored," the eldest, Serafina, cooed, her hand fluttering near her throat. "Our pack is small, but our loyalty is vast." "Loyalty is a word people use when they want something," I replied, my voice a low rumble. "I'm here for the audit. I hear you're selling assets to Gavin." "Why?" Serafina didn't blink. Instead, she smoothed her silk dress. "A simple debt, sire. A girl of no consequence. A Null. She's better off in a labor camp where she can be useful." Meanwhile, my wolf stirred in the back of my mind. It was a low, vibrating growl I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger. It was an itch, a sensory pull that dragged my gaze toward the floorboards. Beneath the luxury, beneath the silk, something was thrumming. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. The sisters shared a look that was too quick, too guilty. "In the kitchens, perhaps?" Serafina offered, her smile tightening. "She's quite clumsy. Not fit for a royal company." Soon after, I heard it. A rhythmic thud. Thump. 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 It was coming from below. It sounded like someone working a grain mill, but there was a hollowness to it. It was the sound of a heartbeat forced into labor. At that moment, the air thickened. I could smell something metallic, silver. No, something heavier. "I want to see the basement," I stated. "Sire, it's a mess," Serafina started, but I moved before she could finish. As I stepped toward the service door, I felt the mark on my soul tingle. It was a sensation I had dismissed as a phantom limb for a decade. Yet, here it was, screaming. I pushed the door open, the shadows dancing between the flickering torches. My heart skipped. The sound was louder now. Chapter 3, The Price of Silence. I watched the exchange from the shadows of the loading dock. Alpha Gavin was there, his face twisted into a smirk that made my skin crawl. He was handing a briefcase to the Mercer sisters. On the other side, two enforcers were dragging a small, hooded figure toward a black transport van. It was a transaction. A soul for a suitcase of cash. 55,000, Gavin chuckled, snapping the briefcase shut. A bit steep for a broken toy, don't you think? She's a Mercer, Serafina replied, her voice cold as ice. Even a defective one carries the name. Think of it as a premium for the silence. I stood perfectly still because any movement would have ended in a bloodbath. I wasn't ready to start a war over a Null, but the way Gavin gripped the girl's arm made my jaw ache. He wasn't treating her like a worker, he was treating her like a prize he intended to break. What's worse was the lack of fight in her. She didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She just moved as if pulled by a string. Standard pack politics, I whispered to myself, trying to force the cold stone back into my heart. Despite that, my wolf wouldn't go quiet. It was pacing, claws scratching at the cage of my ribs. As the van's engine turned over, the girl was tossed inside like a bag of grain. The sisters didn't even wave goodbye. They just turned and walked back into their gilded cage, laughing about a dress they wanted to buy. The van began to pull away, the tires spitting gravel. In the span of a breath, the rear window glass caught the moonlight. The girl's hood fell back. The moment our eyes locked, the world narrowed to a single point. Her eyes weren't brown or blue. They were a ghostly, haunting pale, a color that didn't belong to a human, nor a common wolf. They were filled with a despair so deep it felt like a physical weight on my chest. She didn't look for help. She just looked at me as if she already knew I wouldn't come. Without thinking, I stepped out into the light. But she was gone. The van sped away, leaving nothing but the smell of exhaust and a lingering, faint scent of winter lilies in the air. Beneath the moonlight, I stood alone, the dead flower in my pocket feeling suddenly, inexplicably warm. Chapter 4, The Smell of the Pit. The drive to Grey Ridge felt like dragging a blade across stone. My jaw remained locked as I watched the dark pines blur past the window, but my mind was already in that transport van. What followed was a cold, calculating fury that Elias knew better than to interrupt. I had spent years being a statue of a king, yet one look at a girl with ghost-pale eyes had cracked the marble. Alpha Gavin's territory starts here, Elias noted, his voice low as we passed a rusted iron gate. Truth be told, the council won't like us being here without a formal invite. We're pushing the limits of the law, Dominic. The law didn't stop him from buying a girl in a loading dock, I countered, my voice a jagged edge. Maybe it's time the law felt a little pressure. Soon after, the fortress of Grey Ridge loomed out of the fog. It wasn't a home, it was a cage. The air here was thick with the scent of damp concrete, stale sweat, and that cloying, chemical sharpness I'd smelled at the Mercer estate. It made my wolf pace behind my ribs, claws out and teeth bared. I stepped out of the car before it even fully stopped, my boots sinking into the mud. Your Majesty. We weren't expecting, a guard stammered, his eyes wide. Rather than answering, I walked right past him. I didn't need an invitation when my blood was screaming that my mate was being bled out somewhere beneath my feet. I followed the scent of silver and sorrow. It led me deep into the bowels of the fortress, down a ramp that felt like a descent into hell. Chapter 5, The Lightning and the Acid. The pits were exactly what they sounded like, concrete holes covered with iron bars. I stood at the edge of the walkway, looking down into a row of cells where the defective and the unwanted were kept. To make things worse, Gavin was already there, standing over a specific grate with a cruel, proprietary grin. He looked up, his face pale with sudden shock. King Dominic. What a surprise, Gavin choked out, trying to mask his fear with a bow. I'm just inspecting the new stock. A bit of a reclamation project, really. Open it, I commanded. No greeting. No formalities. Just the weight of my power pressing down on the room until the shadows seemed to shrink. Gavin hesitated, but my stare was a death sentence. He signaled a guard. The iron grate screeched open. Below, curled in a ball on the cold floor, was the girl. She looked like a broken bird, her ribs visible through a thin, dirt-stained tunic. She was covered in grime, looking more human than wolf. I jumped down into the pit, my boots echoing like a thunderclap. Without thinking, I reached out. I wanted to pull her into the light, to prove to myself she was real. The moment my fingers brushed the skin of her arm, the mate bond didn't just snap, it exploded. It felt like being struck by lightning and doused in acid at the same time. A violent, agonizing shock ripped through my system, throwing me back against the concrete wall. My vision blurred. My lungs seized. Beside me, the girl let out a strangled cry and collapsed, her body shaking as if she were being electrocuted. "What did you do to her?" I roared, my voice shifting into a predatory growl. "Nothing. She's just a null, sire." Gavin started, but I was already back on my feet, ignoring the fire in my veins. I saw the needle marks then. Not just one or two, but dozens, hidden in the crooks of her elbows and the nape of her neck. Truth be told, I had never seen a wolf suppressed this way. Her blood was a battlefield of silver and mercury, fighting the very magic that tried to save her. Chapter 6, The Stolen Queen. Gavin tried to step between us, his posture defensive. "She is my property, Dominic. I paid the mercers. I have the contract. You have no right to interfere in pack commerce." "I am the law," I whispered, the words vibrating with the king's command. I stepped toward him, my shadow stretching until it covered the entire pit. "And this girl is under royal decree. Effective immediately, she is an asset of the crown. You can't do that. The alphas will rebel. You're stealing from us." Gavin screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Let them rebel," I replied, my eyes glowing a feral, golden amber. "I'll give them a war they'll never forget. But if you touch her again, I won't just take your assets. I'll take your head." Before he could move, I knelt and scooped her up. She was so light, frighteningly light, as if her soul was already half gone. Her head fell back against my shoulder, and for a second, I felt the faint, thrumming pulse of her heart. It was erratic. It was weak. But it was mine. We reached the jet as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. Elias had the medical team standing by, their faces pale as they saw the king of the wolves carrying a dying human girl. I laid her on the medical bed, my hands trembling, not from the shock of the bond, but from a terrifying, new fear. As the jet lifted off, shaking with the force of the engines, the cabin lights flickered. I looked down at her unconscious face, her pale eyes closed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Between one breath and the next, I felt the connection pulse again, softer now, but deeper. "Why did you wait until you were half dead to find me?" I whispered, my voice thick with a grief I didn't understand. She didn't answer. Instead, she let out a small, pained whimper and curled toward my heat. I realized then that I was no longer a king looking for a miracle. I was a man who had finally found the only thing in the world worth saving. The air thickened as the medical monitors began to beep. The battle for her life was just starting. And just like that, everything changed. Chapter 7, The Cage of Comfort. The citadel of Vain was built to be a fortress of ice and silence, but tonight, it felt like a tomb. I paced the marble hallway outside the Royal Medical Wing, my boots echoing like a ticking clock. Through the glass partition, I watched the physicians move like ghosts around her bed. She looked so small against the white sheets, a splash of broken color in a world of sterile perfection. "The silver levels are dropping, sire," the lead doctor whispered, stepping out with a weary sigh. "But the mercury, it's bonded to her very marrow. Because of that, the detox will be violent. Her body thinks the poison is a part of her soul." "Do whatever it takes," I growled, my hand tightening on the hilt of my blade. "If she dies, this mountain falls with her." What followed was a night of cognitive dissonance. I was the king of the Black Guard, a man who valued cold logic and tactical power. Yet, looking at her, my logic had shattered. My wolf was pacing, whining, demanding I break the glass and hold her. Still, I stayed back. I didn't know what scared me more, the prophecy being real, or the fact that I finally had something to lose. Chapter 8, The Truth in the Dark. When she finally opened those pale eyes, the room felt like it lost its gravity. I stepped into the chamber, my presence causing the air to hum. She didn't look at the silk sheets or the mountain view. Instead, her hands scrambled under the pillow, searching for something with a frantic, desperate intensity. "It's gone," she rasped, her voice sounding like crushed velvet. "My jar. Where is my money?" "You're in the citadel, Sienna," I said, moving slowly as if approaching a wounded predator. "You don't need to buy your way out of here. You're safe." "Safe?" She let out a jagged, hollow laugh. "Nobody is safe. They just changed the price of the cage." "Who are you? Another alpha who wants a Null for his collection?" In that moment, her words cut deeper than any silver blade. I sat on the edge of the bed, and she flinched, pulling the covers to her chin. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide the terror in her scent. It was the smell of a survivor who had been told she was worthless for 20 years. "I am Dominic," I said, my voice dropping to a low, soothing vibration. "And you aren't a Null, Sienna. Your sisters, they didn't just neglect you. They poisoned you because you were the only thing they were afraid of." As the truth unraveled, her face went deathly still. I told her about the white wolf, about the prophecy that had been the heartbeat of my ancestors. She listened, her fingers twisting in the sheets. Before I could speak again, she looked up, her ghostly eyes searching mine. "You're only saving me because of a story," she whispered. "Because you want a queen, not a girl who spent her life scrubbing floors in a basement." "Maybe it was fate that brought me to that dock," I replied, leaning closer until the space between us burned. "But I'm saving you because when I touched you, my soul finally woke up. Truth be told, I don't care about the prophecy. I care about the girl who had a spine of steel while they tried to turn her blood into lead." Chapter 9, The Mountain Groans. The first leak happened just as the sun dipped behind the peaks. I was helping her stand when a sudden, violent shudder rocked the citadel. It wasn't an earthquake, it was her. As the toxins began to purge, her latent power surged out in a wave of freezing energy. Frost bloomed across the walls in the shape of wolf paws. The temperature plummeted, and the very mountain seemed to groan in recognition of its true sovereign. Sienna screamed, her body arching as if an invisible force was pulling her apart. "Hold her," the doctor shouted, but the guards were thrown back by a blast of pure, white light. I didn't think so. I lunged forward, catching her before she hit the floor. The moment our eyes locked, the air in the room vanished. The bond pulsed like a drumbeat, a rhythmic thrum that centered the chaos. I pulled her against my chest, my own heat fighting the frost that was creeping up her arms. "Fight it, Sienna," I breathed into her ear, my voice thick with a raw, desperate passion. "Don't let them win. Claim your body. Claim your wolf." Between one breath and the next, the frost shattered. The room went silent, save for the sound of her ragged breathing against my neck. She was shaking, her fingers digging into my shoulders, but the pale glow in her eyes was stronger now. She wasn't surviving anymore, she was reclaiming herself. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice a small, precious gift. What followed was a moment of terrifying clarity. I looked up to see a messenger standing in the doorway, his face white with fear. "Sire. Alpha Gavin has contacted the pack media," the messenger stammered. "He's calling you a kidnapper. He's saying the girl is human and you've gone mad with the prophecy lie. The media war, it's already begun." I looked down at the girl in my arms. She was the most powerful thing I had ever held, and yet, she was still so fragile. The world was coming for her, and they would use every lie in the book to keep her in the shadows. "Let them come," I growled, my wolf finally finding its purpose. "They want a war. I'll give them a revolution. Chapter 10, The Gilded Snare. The war room was flooded with the artificial glow of a dozen holographic screens, each one bleeding the same poison. I stood with my arms crossed, watching the Mercer sisters weep on a global broadcast. They looked like tragic saints, their faces perfectly lit to hide the blackness in their hearts. Not only that, they were holding up forged medical records, papers that claimed Sienna was a mentally unstable human, suffering from delusions of wolf blood. He took her from us, Serafina sobbed into the camera, a performance that would have won awards if it weren't a death warrant. Our poor, human sister needs medical care, not the delusions of a king who has lost his mind to a fairy tale. What followed was a roar from my wolf that rattled the heavy oak table. Still, I couldn't reach through the screen and tear their tongues out. I was a king, and the world was watching for any sign of the tyrant they were painting. To make things worse, the Council of Alphas was already calling for an emergency session to discuss my mental state. "They're good, sire," Elias muttered, his eyes tracking the social media metrics. "The public believes them. They see a fragile girl being held by a cold, powerful man. It's a narrative that sells. It's a narrative that kills," I snapped, my voice like grinding stone. "They aren't just lying about her health, they're erasing her existence. Because of that, the council won't see a queen when I present her. They'll see a liability." Just like that, the heavy doors to the war room swung open. Sienna stood there, wrapped in a heavy fur cloak that made her look like a ghost against the dark wood. She was pale, her skin almost translucent from the detox, but her eyes were burning with a fire that hadn't been there yesterday. "Let me see them," she said, her voice trembling but steady. She walked toward the screens, her eyes locked on her sisters' faces. As the silence stretched, the air in the room began to drop in temperature. Frost began to lace the edges of the holographic displays. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached out and touched the screen where Serafina's face was, her fingers leaving a trail of ice. Chapter 11, The Cabal's Curse. "They were paid to do this," Sienna whispered, her breath hitching. "They didn't just hate me, Dominic. They were hired to make sure I never shifted." Moments later, she gasped, her hand flying to her temple. Her eyes rolled back, and before I could move, she began to slide toward the floor. I caught her, my arms acting as a tether to the physical world, but she wasn't with me. She was somewhere else. She was in the ghost vision, the ancestral memory of the white wolf. "I see them," she moaned, her body twitching in my arms. A room with no windows. Black robes. The Cabal. They gave my sisters mercury. They said, the prophecy must die with the last Mercer. Deep down, I knew the truth then. This wasn't just a pack dispute or a gambling debt. This was a coup against the very soul of our species. The Cabal, the secret group of extremists who believed shifters should rule the humans with an iron fist, feared the white wolf because her power was one of balance, not just destruction. "Sienna, come back to me," I commanded, my king's command vibrating through my chest to her heart. The moment our eyes locked again, the vision shattered. She blinked, the ghostly silver light in her pupils fading back to pale gray. Her body moved on instinct, clinging to my shirt, her face buried in the crook of my neck. She was shaking so violently I thought her bones might break. "They didn't just want me weak," she whispered into my skin, her voice a jagged serration. "They wanted me to watch you fall. They're using me as the hammer to break your throne." "Then we'll turn the hammer into a sword," I replied, my hand cupping the back of her head. "No matter how hard they try, they can't hide the sun with a handful of dust. You are the truth, Sienna. And the truth is coming for them." Chapter 12, The Vial of Blood. The fallout of the vision left the room in a state of chilling clarity. I realized that my command rights were being stripped by the hour. The other alphas were already mobilizing, fueled by Gavin's leaked reports that claimed Sienna's lineage was a lie. What's worse, the high-frequency hum of the mercury in her blood was still there, a ticking time bomb that prevented her from reaching her wolf. "We have to go public," I said, looking at Elias. but not as a king and a victim. As a sovereign and his mate. Sire, if she fails to shift in front of them, it's over, Elias warned. The law says a king who mates with a human without council approval loses his command. They'll use it to execute you both. At that moment, a small drone buzzed against the balcony glass. It carried a tiny, velvet box. I opened it to find a single, sealed vial of black liquid, the concentrated toxin, and a note in Gavin's handwriting. A gift for the queen, who can't grow fur. Maybe it was fate that gave them the first move, I growled, crushing the note in my fist. But it will be the last thing they ever do. I looked at Sienna. She was standing by the window, watching the storm clouds gather over the peaks. The mountain was groaning again, the atmosphere shifting with her moods. She looked like a goddess of winter, beautiful and terrifying. Are you ready? I asked, my voice a low, heavy anchor. She didn't turn around, but I felt her soul answer mine. I've been in a cage my whole life, Dominic. If I'm going to die, I want to die biting the hand that fed me the poison. As the sky darkened, I realized that I wasn't just falling in love with a woman, I was falling in love with a revolution. The stakes were no longer just our lives, but the legitimacy of the entire monarchy. And just like that, the hunt became a war. Chapter 13, The Lion's Den. The grand summit of Alphas was a sea of bared teeth and tailored suits. I walked into the great hall of the citadel, my cape sweeping the floor like a shadow. Beside me, Sienna moved with a grace that felt like a haunting melody. She was dressed in white silk that clung to her like frost, her neck bare, exposing the lack of a mating mark. Because of that, the murmurs from the gallery sounded like the hissing of vipers. Look at him, I heard a council member sneer, his voice carrying through the arched rafters. The king has brought a pet to a wolf's table. He expects us to bow to a Null. What followed was a cold, hard silence as I reached the dais. I didn't take my throne. Instead, I stood at the center of the floor, my hand resting on the small of Sienna's back. I could feel her heart racing, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs, yet she held her chin high. No matter how hard she tried to look composed, the sheer weight of 100 alpha stares was a physical pressure that made the air feel like lead. You called this session to question my sanity, I began, my voice a low, dangerous vibration that silenced the room. But you should be questioning your own eyes. You see a girl. I see the end of your corruption. We see a human, Dominic. Alpha Gavin shouted, stepping forward from the crowd. He was smiling, that slick, greasy smile that made my king's command itch in my throat. You've broken the sacred law. You've claimed a mate without a wolf. By the decree of the first pack, you are unfit to lead. Still, I didn't flinch. I looked directly at Gavin, my eyes narrowing until they were slits of molten amber. The only thing unfit in this room is the poison you've been feeding the Mercer bloodline. In fact, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to testify. Chapter 14, The Taste of Ash. The space between us burned as Gavin approached the dais. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by the Mercer sisters, who were playing their roles to perfection, huddled together as if afraid of the monster who had stolen their sister. What followed was a carefully orchestrated trap. If she is the white wolf, let her shift, Gavin challenged, his voice echoing. Let her show us the miracle, or let the guards take her back to her family. The council demands the blood shift test. Now. My heart skipped. I knew the mercury hadn't fully left her system. If she tried to shift and failed, the backlash would kill her. If she didn't try, they would drag her away, and I would be executed for treason. Instead of answering, I looked at Sienna. She looked back at me, her soul answering mine through the bond. I'll do it, she whispered, her voice a small flame in the darkness. Soon after, the room was cleared of all furniture, leaving only a circle of cold stone. The council elders stepped forward, their faces like carved granite. They began the chant of the moon, a rhythmic, guttural sound that usually forced a shifter's blood to boil. Truth be told, I wanted to stop it. I wanted to grab her and run back to the mountains, but the bond pulsed with a sudden, fierce pride. "Dominic," she breathed, her hand reaching for mine one last time. The moment our eyes locked, I felt a surge of heat that made the mountain air feel like a furnace. I leaned in, ignoring the gasps from the alphas, and pressed my lips to hers. It wasn't a kiss of goodbye, it was a transfer of strength. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the dead moon lily in my pocket finally began to unfurl, its petals turning a brilliant, blinding white. Chapter 15, The Hum of Treason. The kiss was the only thing holding the world together. Between one breath and the next, I felt the mountain itself answer her. The flora in the great hall, vines that had been dry for decades, suddenly sprouted green shoots. It was a miracle of life in a house of death. Yet, the moment of peace was shattered by a sound only a king could hear. Gavin reached into his pocket. A beat later, a high-frequency hum filled the air. It was a silver sound generator, a device designed to scramble the nervous system of a shifting wolf. To make things worse, the council chairs remained silent, their eyes fixed on Sienna with a predatory intensity. "Something is wrong," Elias hissed from my side, his hand on his holster. "The air, it's vibrating with silver." "He's cheating," I growled, my voice a roar in the making. "He's trying to trigger a seizure instead of a shift." Before I could move, the tension broke. Sienna let out a scream that wasn't human. Her body arched, her bones cracking with the sound of breaking ice. The white wolf was trying to emerge, but the silver hum was a wall of static she couldn't break through. Rather than the majestic transformation I had seen in the vision, she began to bleed from the ears, her pale eyes wide with an agony I felt in my own marrow. "Stop it!" I roared, lunging toward Gavin, but the council's elite guard intercepted me. "He's killing her. Look at the frequencies." "The test must continue," the lead elder shouted, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "If she cannot survive the hum, she is no queen." As the silence roared in my ears, I saw Gavin's thumb move on the device, turning the frequency higher. Sienna fell to her knees, her white silk dress staining red as her skin began to tear. Her wolf pressed forward, desperate and wild, but the trap was closing. And just like that, everything changed. I saw the sisters smiling in the shadows, and I realized that my love had led her straight to the executioner's block. Chapter 16, The Silence of the Crown. The scream that ripped from Sienna's throat didn't sound like a woman, and it didn't sound like a wolf. It sounded like a world ending. I lunged forward, my muscles coiling to shred anyone in my path, but the council's elite guards slammed into me. What followed was a blur of silver-tipped spears and heavy shields. I fought with the desperation of a drowning man, but for every guard I threw back, 3 more took their place. "Stop the pulse!" I roared, my voice breaking under the weight of my fury. "Gavin, I will peel the skin from your bones for this." Yet, the alphas in the gallery didn't move. They watched with a cold, clinical fascination as Sienna's body began to seize on the stone floor. Her silk dress was no longer white, it was a map of red rivers. To make things worse, the silver hum was vibrating so intensely that the glass chandeliers above us began to spiderweb and shatter. "The test is conclusive," the council chair stated, his voice booming over the chaos. "The subject is rejecting the shift. She is a biological fraud. Dominic Vain, by the authority of the high laws, you are hereby stripped of your command for the crime of prophetic heresy." Before I could speak, a heavy mace slammed into the back of my knees. I fell, the stone cold against my skin, my eyes locked on Sienna as she went limp. She wasn't moving. Her pale eyes were fixed on the ceiling, glazed and empty. She didn't know what scared her more, the pain, or the fact that she was being stolen from me again. "Reclaim the pack property," Gavin ordered, his voice dripping with triumph. What followed was the ultimate psychological blow. I watched my own guards, men I had bled with, stand down as Gavin's enforcers dragged Sienna's unconscious body away. They didn't treat her like a queen. They dragged her by her arms like a carcass. I tried to reach for her, my fingers clawing at the floor, but the iron collar of the pits was snapped around my neck. Chapter 17, The Hollow King. The pits of the citadel were deeper and colder than the ones in Grey Ridge. I sat in the dark, the silver-lined chains burning my wrists every time I moved. Still, the physical pain was nothing compared to the silence in my head. The mate bond, once a thrumming wire of heat, was now a dull, aching void. A king with no command is just a man with a heavy hat, a voice whispered from the shadows of the corridor. Gavin stepped into the faint light of the torch, his face twisted into a mask of smug satisfaction. He held up a small, blood-stained scrap of white silk, a piece of Sienna's dress. Because of that, my wolf lunged at the bars, the silver chain searing my skin as I snarled at him. "Where is she, Gavin?" I spat, the taste of blood in my mouth. "If you've touched her." "She's back where she belongs," he chuckled, leaning against the damp wall. "In a basement." Only this time, the mercury doses tripled. "She'll be dead by morning, and you'll be executed as a madman who fell in love with a human ghost. The sisters are already celebrating. In fact, they're picking out the black dresses for your funeral." Moments later, he turned and walked away, leaving me in a silence that roared. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I had relied on my title, my law, and my destiny to save her, and all of it had failed. I had been a statue of a king when I should have been a monster of a man. Deep down, I knew the truth. I had led her into this because I wanted the prophecy to be true more than I wanted her to be safe. I looked at the corner of my cell, where the dead moon lily from my desk had been tossed by a guard. It was crushed, its white petals smeared with the grime of the floor. Chapter 18, The Light in the Vent. That night, the mountain didn't groan. It wept. I could hear the wind howling through the air vents, a lonely, desolate sound that mirrored the hollow in my chest. I sat with my back against the cold stone, waiting for the dawn and the executioner's blade. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find the spark of my wolf. It was as if the silver hum had killed the beast inside me too. "Is this the end of the Vain bloodline?" I whispered to the dark. "A cell and a broken promise?" As the silence stretched, a faint shimmer caught my eye. It wasn't the torchlight. It was coming from the air vent above. As if pulled by a string, a single, tiny hair drifted down through the grate. It landed on my knee, and my breath caught. It was wolf hair. Long, coarse, and a white so pure it seemed to glow with its own internal light. The moment I touched it, the air in the cell thickened. The void in my mind didn't just fill, it erupted. I felt a surge of raw, ancient power that didn't come from my crown or my lineage. It came from her. Somewhere in the dark of Gavin's stronghold, Sienna wasn't dying. She was changing. "She's alive," I breathed, my heart pounding so loudly it echoed off the walls. What followed was a transformation of my own. I didn't need the council's permission to be a king. I didn't need the prophecy to be a mate. I grabbed the iron bars of my cell, the silver burning into my palms, but I didn't let go. Instead, I let the rage and the love flow into my arms until the metal began to groan. Beneath the moonlight, the Null hair glowed brighter, and for the first time in centuries, the gods finally answered. The chains snapped. The door buckled. And just like that, everything changed. I wasn't a king anymore, I was a storm, and I was coming to bring the winter to Gavin's front door. Chapter 19, The Insurrection of Blood. The iron bars didn't just bend, they screamed. I stepped out of the cell, my hands raw and bleeding from the silver's bite, but I couldn't feel the pain. What followed was a cold, predatory focus that turned the corridors of the citadel into a slaughterhouse for anyone foolish enough to stand in my way. I wasn't fighting with the grace of a king anymore. I was fighting with the savagery of a mate whose soul had been set on fire. "Sire. You're alive," a voice hissed from the shadows near the armory. I spun, my claws extending, only to see Elias and a handful of the Black Guard. They weren't wearing their ceremonial crests, they were covered in the grime of a coup. Because of that, I knew the citadel hadn't completely fallen. Deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't been waiting for a decree, they had been waiting for a leader. "The council is holding a victory feast in the Great Hall," Elias whispered, handing me my warblade. Gavin has Sienna at the Grey Ridge stronghold. He's planning to execute her at dawn to purify the bloodline. We don't have much time. We have exactly enough time to burn his world to the ground, I replied, my voice a jagged rasp. But we aren't going alone. Release the pits. Every Null, every defective wolf Gavin threw away, give them a sword. Today, the outcasts become the army. What followed was a silent revolution. We moved through the lower levels like a tide of shadows, breaking locks and shattering chains. I saw the faces of the forgotten, men and women who had lived in the dark for years. In the span of a breath, their hopelessness turned into a lethal, quiet rage. We didn't need a prophecy to save us, we just needed to stop being afraid of the men who called us broken. Chapter 20, The March of the Shadows. The trek to the Grey Ridge stronghold was a blur of frozen mud and adrenaline. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of silver and wet stone, I felt the bond pulse again. It was a rhythmic, agonizing pull that guided me through the woods. Yet, I wasn't just leading a pack, I was leading an insurrection of the spirit. They won't expect us to hit the front gate, Elias noted as we crested the hill overlooking Gavin's fortress. They think you're still in chains. They think we're defeated. Instead, we're going to show them what happens when you corner a wolf with nothing left to lose, I stated, my eyes locked on the tower where I knew Sienna was being held. Without warning, the ground beneath our feet began to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake, and it wasn't a pulse. It was a howl, a sound so ancient and powerful that the trees themselves seemed to bow. It echoed in the marrow of my bones, a haunting, beautiful cry that hadn't been heard in 500 years. My soul answered it before my lips could, a growl rising in my throat that joined the chorus of the wild. She's shifting, I whispered, my heart skipping a beat. The mercury, she's burning it out of her blood. What's worse for Gavin was that he had no idea the goddess he had tried to bury was about to rise. I raised my blade, the steel catching the first light of the false dawn. Not only that, I felt my own wolf finally merge with my human will. I wasn't a king of laws, I was a king of the hunt. Chapter 21, The Arena of the Damned. We burst through the perimeter of Grey Ridge like a thunderclap. I didn't wait for the guards to find their weapons, I was through the first line of defense before the alarm could even finish its first wail. The fight was a vivid, bloody blur. I moved on instinct, my blade finding the gaps in their armor, my wolf strength fueling every strike. To the arena. I roared, seeing the light of torches spilling from the central courtyard. What followed was a scene from a nightmare. Gavin was standing in the center of the arena, a silver bullet pistol aimed at a slumped, shivering figure in the middle of the stone circle. The Mercer sisters were there, too, watching with wide, eager eyes. They wanted to see the end of the Null, who had threatened their status. Stop! I screamed, throwing myself into the path of the enforcers who tried to block me. Gavin spun around, his face a mask of disbelief. Dominic? How? It doesn't matter. You're too late. The world needs to see her die as a human to forget your lies. He pulled the trigger. Time stood still. I lunged, reaching for a bond that was suddenly a blinding, searing white heat. Before the bullet could reach her, the space between them burned. The ground exploded in a burst of ice and light so intense it blinded every man in the arena. Shadows danced between us as the air thickened with the scent of winter lilies and raw, celestial power. I didn't come for the prophecy, Gavin, I growled, standing in the center of the crater as the light began to solidify. I came for my wife. As the silence roared, a massive, white paw stepped out of the smoke. The white wolf hadn't just emerged, she had arrived to claim her throne. And she looked hungry. Chapter 22, The Ghost Queen's Ascent. The creature that stood in the center of the crater was a nightmare carved from winter. She was massive, her fur a shimmering, ethereal white that seemed to drink the moonlight and spit out silver fire. She didn't look like a wolf, she looked like a god. What followed was a paralyzing aura of power that brought every alpha in the arena to their knees. Because of that, the air itself became too heavy to breathe, smelling of ozone and ancient ice. Kill it. Kill it now. Gavin screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic squeak. Yet, his enforcers couldn't move. Their wolves were whimpering, bellies pressed to the dirt in total submission. I watched from the ground, my chest aching with a pride so fierce it felt like a physical wound. She didn't just kill Gavin's men, she dismantled them. She moved like a blur of snow and teeth, her movements a haunting dance of death. Dominic, her voice echoed in my mind, no longer a whisper but a roar of light. What followed was the end of Alpha Gavin. He tried to scramble away, his hands clawing at the stone, but the white wolf was faster. She didn't use her claws. She simply breathed, and a wave of frost locked his feet to the floor. She stepped toward him, her ghostly eyes glowing with the weight of 500 years of vengeance. Just like that, the man who had tried to play God was reduced to a sobbing wreck. Chapter 23, The Fallen Sisters. As the silence stretched, the Mercer sisters tried to flee toward the service tunnels. They were clutching their silk skirts, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated terror. But then, the tunnel doors opened. They didn't find an escape route, they found the army of the forgotten. The Nulls I had freed stood there, their eyes burning with the same fire as their queens. You called us defective, I said, walking toward the sisters as I wiped blood from my blade. You said we were assets to be sold. Truth be told, you are the only things in this world that are truly broken. Dominic, please. Serafina wailed, her hands outstretched. We are family. We were protecting the name. Rather than answering, I looked at the white wolf. She shifted back in a burst of mist, her human form emerging from the light. She was naked, wrapped only in the frost that clung to her skin, but she looked more like a queen than she ever had in silk. I stepped forward, pulling my royal cloak from my shoulders and wrapping it around her. The name Mercer is dead, Sienna said, her voice clear and cold. From this day on, there are no Nulls. There is only free. Moments later, the council guards arrived, but they didn't come to arrest us. They saw the white wolf, and they saw the king who had bled to protect her. They saw a miracle standing in the middle of a graveyard. One by one, they lowered their spears and bowed their heads. As the truth unraveled, the corruption of the old world began to melt away like spring snow. Chapter 24, The Blooming Destiny. The coronation was held on the balcony of the citadel, under the same sky where I had once stood with a dead flower. But tonight, the mountain was alive. Thousands of wolves gathered below, their howls a symphony of hope that shook the stars. I stood beside Sienna, my hand in hers, the mate bond humming a song of perfect, unbreakable harmony. I place this crown not on a prophecy, I said, my voice carrying to the edges of the kingdom, but on the woman who taught a statue how to feel again. I placed the circlet of white gold on her head, and the mountain groaned one last time, not in pain, but in welcome. What followed was the signing of the Null Protection Act, a law that ensured no wolf would ever be caged for their blood again. We had built a new world, not because fate demanded it, but because we chose to fight for it. Are you happy, Dominic? Sienna whispered as the celebration roared below us. Truth be told, I'm terrified, I replied, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Because for the first time in my life, I have a future I actually want to see. I looked down at my desk as we walked back inside. The shriveled moon lily was gone. In its place was a vase of fresh, glowing white flowers, their petals open and drinking in the light. Deep down, I knew the truth, destiny didn't save us. Our choice to love through the mercury and the madness did. And as the winds shifted, carrying the scent of winter lilies, I knew the Ghost Queen's reign was just beginning.